Hello, my name's Angela Waind and I'm a consultant counselling psychologist with North Cumbria Integrated Care, where I lead the cancer psychology team, and we also work with people with other long-term conditions. Today we're going to look at an emotional wellbeing toolkit. So we're going to think about what might be in that toolkit and why it's important, especially when you're someone who's affected by lymphoma, whether that's because you're living with lymphoma or because you've got a family member or a friend, someone close to you who's living with lymphoma. So emotional well-being is one of those phrases that gets bandied around a lot and maybe doesn't mean an awful lot to us. But in essence, what it is a sense of balance. It's not about feeling fantastic all the time, because we're humans in the world and that's often not how things feel, especially when you're living with a diagnosis like lymphoma. But it's about having the sense that we've got the skills and the tools to be able to manage day-to-day life, to be able to live well, and really importantly, to be able to focus on the things that are most important to us in life. When we've got emotional well-being, it means that actually we've got a buffer that allows us to be able to navigate changes in life, to navigate times when things are difficult. And that's certainly the case when you're living with lymphoma or with other blood cancers, where there can be a lot of uncertainty. So what it's really like, I guess the way I like to think about emotional well-being is that it's like the tyres on a car. So you're going to hear talks today, you may have already heard them, from colleagues in lots of different areas involved in lymphoma care. And all of those aspects are critical. When you first get diagnosed with lymphoma, or indeed if you're living with lymphoma long term, all the focus can be, understandably, on your physical health and your physical well-being. But actually, to live well, we need to have some balance. So it's a bit like the tyres on a car, really. If they aren't all inflated to pretty much the same level, then the ride's going to be a bit bumpy and uncomfortable. That's okay if you're only going a short distance. You can limp along to the next services and make it there. But actually, if you've got a long journey, if you're someone who's on active monitoring, or you know that you've got repeated treatments that are going to come up in the future, or even if you're in remission, then if you haven't got that balance in each of the tyres of the car, the ride is going to be bumpy and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be really uncomfortable. And when you're trying to navigate in a landscape that's new to you, which is what happens when we're living with a new diagnosis of cancer in particular, or lymphoma, then that's a real challenge. So having emotional well-being to go with your physical well-being and to go with your social well-being, and that includes your family and your friends and work life, that means we've got that balance that allows us to travel along, even when there's bumps in the road, even when there's diversions, that we can do that well and feel that we can manage well. With lymphoma, and obviously everyone who's listening to this are the experts in that, there can be very particular challenges. People will often tell me that, you know, if they meet someone who's been diagnosed with lung cancer or with breast cancer, they know someone else who's got that, and there's a sense of familiarity and knowing what the path might look like. In lymphoma, that's often not the way. People don't have that same sense of familiarity and understanding of what this might involve for you or for your family member or loved one. So that can make it difficult before anything else has happened. But the reality is that lymphoma actually impacts on all areas of your life. It isn't just your physical health. It affects your family and the people who are important to you. It can affect your finances, because there's getting to and from hospital, but there's also the impact on work for you or for other people in the family. It's what it can do to your social life, to the things that you had planned for yourself. So it's like dropping a pebble into a pond. The ripples go out and out, and all of those are different challenges. But alongside that and the uncertainty about what might be happening with your treatment plans or being on active monitoring, actually people get a whole new set of responsibilities to deal with. When they've already got so much to deal with, they've got maybe a new diagnosis or having to have a changed picture of life that now involves regular appointments or maybe some very intrusive treatments if people are looking at stem cell transplants or CAR T therapy, where they're going to be away from home for a long time as well. But even long term, those new responsibilities go on, and they tend to be 24-hour-a-day responsibilities. So you're dealing with the effects of cancer in your day-to-day life and in your quality of life, but also physically. You're having to maybe monitor your own health and to know when to get help, when to contact your team. But you've also maybe have thought about making changes in life, different diets or trying to become more active in order to be as well as possible. And all of that's part about trying to navigate your way back to normal life and the things that are important to you. But that means that it can be incredibly challenging to try and work out what emotional well-being looks like at this time. If things are a struggle, it's really important to say that it's absolutely normal. Things like anxiety and depression or low mood, feeling stressed, are a normal part of life. They're things that we experienced before lymphoma came into the picture, and they're things that are there for everybody around us. What's different is that when you're living with lymphoma, actually the chances of experiencing low mood, depression or anxiety are much higher, around sort of 30 to 50% higher. And then there are things about fear of progression, fear of recurrence, what's going to happen next. That's there for 50% of people who receive a diagnosis of lymphoma, and some research puts that even higher. So actually, being diagnosed with lymphoma, living with this long term, whether that's whatever your role as a person affected by it, means we're in a high threat situation. And our brains are wired to respond to threat in a very, very particular way that works, but which is based on some really old programming. So what our brains do is they switch us, when they sense threat, into a fight or flight or a freeze or flop mode. And that's meant to protect us. So what that actually means is we're on high alert. Our bodies are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol that's designed to either get us away from the threat or to be able to fight it off. And if that's not working, then it will drop us. So we can experience different things in response to that. We can feel like we're very jittery. Physically, we can feel really uncomfortable. We can have heart racing, feel like you've got tunnel vision, even sweating, stomach churning, or you can feel like your body's stopped completely. You haven't got an ounce of energy in your body and there's nothing you can do. You can find yourself feeling snappy and short-tempered. And that can mean that life feels even more out of control than it does in relation to the cancer itself. And that means the situation then can keep going and become more difficult. So it becomes a big challenge, but a very normal one. This is a normal physiological response to being in a very abnormal situation. So we're on autopilot at this time. And what we need to do is to be able to shift from that threat mode and threat brain into our normal brain, our brain that can think. Because when we're in threat brain, we're not doing any thinking. We're just trying to get to safety, whatever way we can do that best. So the signs that you might spot when you're feeling like this is maybe having a busy brain. That might be lots and lots of worry thoughts coming in. You might have thoughts about I ought to be doing this, or I must be doing that, I should be doing this better. You might notice that you or someone else around you is cutting off from things and not doing the things they would normally do, or connecting with the people who are most important to them. You might notice that you're struggling with memory or concentration. Sometimes we talk about brain fog, where you feel like you just can't get to something. If you read a book, you read the same page 3 times. If you have a conversation with somebody, an hour later you might have forgotten what it is. You might find, like I said before, you're a little bit short-tempered. Or it might be that it's all in your body. You feel absolutely exhausted. You've got this tired but wired feeling where you're really, really jittery, which is exhausting in itself. Being able to spot those signs is really important though, because that tells us that our emotional well-being is challenged. And actually we can at that point think about what could we do to maybe reset things and make them different. And there are some simple things that we can do for ourselves or for other people around this. So if you start to notice those signs, the most important thing to do first of all is to pause and to be able to hit that reset button that I was talking about. That means we can go from our threat brain into our normal thinking brain. We do that by connecting with our soothing, calming parts of ourself. That then means we can start to decide what to do next. And we can read the signs. We can look and decide actually what's going on, what's the problem at the moment, and this is normal, to know that this is okay. I can then think about exploring what's going on. So are the thoughts in my head, are they accurate, or are they maybe a bit inaccurate? Am I only seeing one part of the picture? Am I really doing nothing, or am I actually doing lots of things that I don't realise? We can look at what actions we can take. Is there something we can try out and see if that's different? Can we bring back on board some of the things that we did before lymphoma that were useful, or before this challenge that helped us? And then we can decide what we need to put into our toolbox. What works for me, what doesn't work for me. Because as I said before, the most important thing about an emotional wellbeing toolkit is it needs to be yours. Toolkits are a bit like teddy bears. They're very, very personal. And my teddy bear would not be your teddy bear, and my toolkit would not be your toolkit. So it is absolutely okay to try out the stuff that we suggest in now and say, this is for me, that's not for me. That's fine. There will be some things that work for you and some things that you think that is an absolute no. Really importantly, being able to get into this different brain, our new brain rather than our old brain, means that we can connect with who we are again. Because when we feel like this, it can make you feel that you're not the same person anymore, that lymphoma's changed you into someone else. It hasn't. Your programming has just been hijacked, and we need to find a way to reset. So the first thing that we do in that is working out what helps us to hit the pause button and the reset button so that we can start to think again. And there's some really simple things that we can do. And everything that we talk about during this half hour, there's going to be some resources to support that you'll be able to log on and take a look at and maybe go back to if they sound like they make sense to you. The first thing of all, I've got there just .b. And actually this is something that I get people to sometimes put on their phone or on a card that they can put in their purse or their wallet. And it is just that. .b, and that means stop and take a breath, because as soon as we've done that, we've started to slow things down again and starting to switch ourselves from that threat brain into our thinking brain. We're starting to soothe and calm our system down a bit, and that's what we really, really need, is to be able to step out of threat and into something more calming and soothing. Another thing that works really well and that you can do anywhere and takes only a few seconds is to look for a rectangle around you anywhere. It can be the TV screen, it can be a window, it can be a book, it can be your laptop screen right now. And what you do is get yourself as comfortable as you can in your chair, wherever you're sat. Feel your feet on the floor and your bum securely supported in your seat. And then on the short side of the rectangle, take a normal breath in. And on the long side, take a long, low breath out, as long as you can make it without becoming uncomfortable. And as you take that long breath out, just notice your shoulders drop down. And try to repeat that 5 times, but if you can only do it 3 times, that's absolutely great, because what it does is as your shoulders drop down, it sends the message to your brain that you can't be running or fighting anymore, because you don't get very far with nice loose shoulders when you're trying to run away from something. We tend to need to be tensed up and ready to power away. So it's a nice simple one that you can try anywhere. Another really good thing to try is just very short relaxation or mindfulness practices. And we're going to have one that's available to you to try. There are lots of others available through different apps or on websites that we can also link into. These don't have to be long mindfulness practices. We're not talking about sitting down for 30 minutes or 40 minutes to do this, because all we're doing right now is hitting that pause and reset button. So we're talking 2 or 3 minutes just to be able to move our brain out of threat and into being able to think. So another thing that you can do is, wherever you are, just work with your senses. Look for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Maybe have a sip of water, or if you've got a biscuit, that would be a great excuse to have a bite of that, or a bar of chocolate. Again, that just slows things down. It moves your attention away from the threat into something else. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're just reorienting ourselves on the map, kind of finding our way. And another thing you can have is just a little object in your pocket. Now, I'd meant to have one with me, and I will put one up on the links, is little yellow stretchy men that you can buy from lots of different retailers for a few pence. They are a perfect thing to have in your pocket. Or an elastic band on your wrist. I've got one on my wrist now, and if it's there, if you've got a hair tie or a band of any kind, you can give that a little snap, and a couple of snaps of that will give you something else to focus on, and that breaks that cycle as well and just brings things down, slows things down a bit. So what you would be doing next then is just thinking about which of those works for your toolkit. And as I say, it's really, really personal. Don't think that you need to do all of these. You just try them out, just a little experiment, any one that appeals to you. And then if that works for you, that can go onto your toolkit list of, actually, that's what helps me hit the pause and reset button. And as soon as you've done that, you're already taking steps towards getting your balance back, getting the air in all the tyres of your car so that you can travel on more comfortably. And it's really important to remember at that point as well that that fight, flight, freeze or flop response is automatic. We all do that all the time. And actually a lot of times in life, it's really, really useful. If you've got a toddler who's about to step off the side of a road to catch a ball, or is leaning far too far over a pond to feed those ducks, that's the response that makes you grab a little hood or grab a little hand and pull them back. So we're not trying to stop this. We're just trying to get some control so that it's not running all the time and running your battery down. So the next step around this is recognizing and remembering. And this is about noticing what's going on, because when we've been in a high threat situation, whatever's going on, we don't tend to be able to know what caused it, what's making it worse, what might make it better, because our brain's been so captivated by that fight or flight, freeze or flop response. We haven't been doing the thinking. We need to do the thinking now. just so that we know what works for us, what's going to go in the toolkit. At this point, it's really good to remember that actually you don't have to do all of this yourself. It's great if you've got someone around you who you can give permission to tell you when they notice any signs that actually your well-being might not be great at the moment, and it might be worthwhile even just having a chance to sit down and recharge your battery. Maybe it's nothing more than that, but having someone who's got the permission to tell you that just actually takes some of that stress and strain away from you, some of the responsibility. So that's a really useful thing to have, and a really useful person to have around you. What you can also do is ask yourself 4 little questions. Doesn't have to be all of them, it can be just one of them. And the reason for this is because what goes on in our bodies, what goes through our minds, the things that we do and how we feel emotionally are all linked together. And we know this from life before lymphoma, from everyday life, that if you're really excited about something, looking forward to something, you might have fizzy butterflies in your stomach that you can feel, and you feel jittery, but it's a good feeling of jittery, and you feel happy and you feel excited, and what's going through your mind is, oh, you know, I can't wait to do this. And actually that gets you out of the door. But when times are more challenging, when you're concerned about doing something or you're anxious about doing something, those responses are different but still linked together. So then you might notice that actually what you're noticing in your body is a knotted stomach, or that your shoulders are very tense. You might notice that you're thinking, I really don't want to do this, or what are they going to say to me? And you feel scared, or you feel frustrated, or you might feel angry. And that makes you want to step away from something, or run away from something, or not take the chance to pick up the phone. So just asking yourself some little questions around that can be really useful. And as I say, ask all 4 of them, or just ask one of them. What do I notice in my body? Because I know for me, that's my first sign. If I'm feeling anxious, it's not what's going through my mind that I pick up on first, it's the knot in my stomach that I feel first. Other people will say they feel their shoulders going up round their ears first of all. So notice what's going on for you. Maybe ask yourself what's just gone through your mind. What is that thought that was there? And what is it I'm doing or I want to do now? Am I avoiding picking up that phone or talking to that person? Or am I doing too much because I'm trying to distract myself? And then maybe checking in with yourself about actually how do you feel emotionally? Because it can be a whole range of things at once, and that can add to the confusion and the feeling that things are out of control. What's really important to say is that this is absolutely normal. It's uncomfortable, but it's really, really normal. And actually in everyday life, life without lymphoma, we don't stop and think about what's going through our mind or what's going through our body. We just are trucking on day to day. So we're not used to doing this, which is why finding a way to practice it, having something to put in your toolkit, can be really, really useful way of doing that. And this is just an example, and we're going to put a slide of this with the resources so that you can maybe fill one of these in if you want to. You don't have to, it's just something that you can try. When you've hit the pause button, then looking at, okay, what is it that's actually going on for me now? What are the things that I notice that tell me I maybe need to do something for me that makes me feel differently, that makes me feel better? And that is about self-compassion. And that can be a really difficult thing to get to when things feel out of balance. What's really important about this is that because all these 4 areas are linked up and are linked to what's happening at the moment, that might be because you're waiting for a hospital appointment or the results of a scan, or you've been on active monitoring for a period of time and you feel a sense of the clock ticking. It can be lots of different things. It might be because you're worried about a family member. It might be because you're worried about the family finances. Is that that link between the 4 sections means that change in any one of those areas actually breaks the vicious cycle that develops around it. So it allows us to spot where we can maybe start to make some changes. But it also allows us to spot what's normal about this. Those symptoms like heart racing, feeling tension, your stomach churning, sweating, maybe your breathing being very rapid, are all part of that physical response that's happened automatically to help you to fight, fly, freeze, or flop. So when you spot those symptoms, you can know that actually, I've been hijacked. I've been hijacked. So what do I want to do next? And if you do decide to try working through that little cycle, we call it hot cross bun, although I have to say it doesn't look anything like the hot cross buns that were around a couple of weeks ago. Bit disappointing. If you want to try that, what you might see is that you notice particular things about you that tell you when things need a bit of a reset, when you need to give yourself 5 minutes to check in with yourself and work out what you need, what would help you to feel better in this moment. Those are going to be the things that you put in your toolkit. What are the things that tell me that I need to do something? Is it a knot in my tummy? Is it that actually I feel sad and I don't know why, or I'm feeling more down than up rather than more up than down, or my brain is really, really busy? It just allows us to be able to decide what to do next. So the next step on our reading of the situation is to explore. And going back to those 4 areas on that hot cross bun, one of the things that we notice from that, and that we notice from working with people all the time, is that the easiest places to start to make changes are often in what we do or what we think. And there's ways to be able to deal with that, or to be able to take steps towards that. And that might be giving yourself 5 minutes to make a quick list, either written down or in your head, of what helped before lymphoma. What was it actually that made you feel better if you were feeling anxious, or you were feeling low, or you were worried about something in particular before you ever had lymphoma? Because it might be possible that you can do some of those things now. Then we often forget about the stuff that we do every day because our brains are so busy, we can't get to it. There isn't the opportunity to do that. So we can maybe start to think about, how can I bring those things back? And it might be that some of those things need to be changed a little bit to fit what's happening in life now, or how you feel physically, or what's going on in other parts of life. That might be about finances, or it might be about the other demands in life, which there are always plenty. They don't go away just because lymphoma's arrived. But it's also that compassion again, to say to yourself, it's okay if it's different. So if what helped before was being able to maybe get outside and have a walk, but you really like to do a long walk, maybe in the fells, or you like to run 4 miles, that would be great if you could do that. But if you can't do that at the moment, that's okay, because it might be that what was important was actually being able to feel yourself doing something physical, or being outside and being able to appreciate what's happening out there, whether it's being able to feel the wind in your face, or a bit of sunshine, or being able to notice the seasons changing, seeing what flowers have arrived, seeing what birds have arrived, or what the trees look like. So it's important to give yourself the permission to flex that and for it to be different. That is okay to do. You're doing something for yourself, and that's incredibly courageous, and it's incredibly difficult to do when you're under this level of stress. So allow yourself to feel the sense of achievement as well at having done that. You can also think about checking out some of those thoughts that are in your mind. There might have been thoughts about, I can't do anything. Being able to complete a little thought diary, and we'll have those available as well on the resources, allows you to just explore that in a bit more detail and to spot, are there any patterns here? Are there particular things that trigger me feeling low or that make me anxious? Is it every time I'm going for a scan, or is it something to do with the kids, or something to do with my wife or husband, in particular their work, or is it going to see the consultant? Whatever it is, it'll help you to spot those patterns if that feels like something that's worthwhile for you. And again, it's just about having a play with them. The same thing with things like activity diaries. Often our brains can tell us that we're not doing anything. And where an activity diary comes in handy is just filling that in for a couple of days can show us that actually that thought's really not that accurate, that actually we're doing a lot of things that we don't give ourselves credit for, because our brains are very good at shrinking things down and saying, oh, that doesn't really count, that's an everyday thing, everybody does that. But actually it absolutely counts. When you're affected by lymphoma and you have all these additional stresses and responsibilities and things that have arrived in life and you're trying to navigate your way, everything you do counts towards that. So being able to notice that is incredibly important. Those activity diaries can also help you to plan, and the thought diaries can help you to look at actually what's a more balanced thought around that. If you're being really harsh on yourself, what would the compassionate version of me say to that? Would I say that to anybody else? It really allows us to just start to question some of the things that they're not trying to make it all different, just trying to notice at this stage what's going on. We can also have a little look and an evaluate of that and say, okay, so having spotted some of those patterns, well, having slowed things down and hit the pause button, having noticed what's going on for me, having now started to maybe question some of my thoughts or finding that there's a couple of things I can do that make a difference. How do I feel now? What does that hot cross bun look like now? Do I feel any different physically? Does my mood feel any better or worse? What's going through my mind? And what do I feel like doing now? Am I doing anything differently? Have I picked up the phone and spoken to a friend? Have I walked down the road even for 5 minutes? Have I taken the dog out? Whatever that is. And then to be able to ask yourself, well, so what does that tell me? What does that tell me about where I am now? Is there stuff that I can do or that other people can help me do to make this different and to take me steps closer to that well-being that's about having a balanced life and being able to live well with lymphoma and the challenges of it? And so it's really useful then to put that down in your toolkit about what is it that makes me more stressed or anxious? What did I notice from those thought diaries or from having a pause and checking in with myself? What is it that makes my mood feel lower? And am I starting to notice what are the things that maybe make my mood better, that make me less stressed or anxious? And again, it's another step towards inflating that well-being tire on the car, and at the same time inflating the physical well-being tire, because we're helping our bodies to recover better, to have less strain on them, but also on our social and personal lives, we're maybe getting some more balance there as well. And it's really important to remember that actually lymphoma is impacting on all areas of your life. It doesn't come in a nice, neat box. And so whatever it is that impacts on your well-being is completely understandable. These are normal responses to an abnormal situation. And it's the important thing is recognizing what that is for you, because that gives you some control back about, is there something I can do with that? Or is there something someone else can help me with that that will make a difference? And that takes us into, so what can I do? And here's this word again about being compassionate. And I don't want this to sound like, oh, here she is giving us another job to do. You've already talked about how we've got all these extra responsibilities and now you're saying, do this every day, all day. It's definitely not that. This is for when you need it, but the being compassionate bit, I'm going to say, be controversial and say, that needs to be there all the time. And it's not something we're often good at. We're usually great at being compassionate to other people, but when it comes to ourselves, that's more of a challenge. So it definitely takes practice. And recognizing that is incredibly important, that this might not come naturally. There'll be lots of those thoughts that come in on that hot cross bun that say, oh no, I shouldn't be focusing on me. But actually, it's incredibly important to focus on you, because that's what makes the difference for the people around you. Whatever your role is, that's what helps you to do that and to do the things that matter most to you, and for you to be able to support other people, to be able to look after other people, whether you're doing that as the person who is living with lymphoma or someone who's more widely affected by lymphoma because it's a loved one or a family member or a friend. So what I would say, and what I think is incredibly important, is if to-do lists can be really useful. They can be useful for lots of reasons. Sometimes they're a pressure. What's important is to cross things off them always, and to notice what we've done and achieved, because that's another thing that goes off the radar. But actually, any to-do list needs to start with some recharge points, because back to our car analogy, we've started to put air in all our tyres, but if we're driving an electric car, we don't set off on a 100-mile journey knowing that we've got a range of 100 miles and we'll just about make it. We plan in where we can plug in, charge the car up for a few minutes so that we can get to the next point. And while we're doing that, we stretch our legs, we grab a cup of tea or coffee or a sandwich. That's what we would do. And that's the same for us being able to manage every day. We need a charge. There are lots of things draining your battery when you're living with lymphoma in your life. And being able to charge that battery up is what enables you to be able to then do the things that matter to you. So these recharge points can be lots of things, but importantly, they need to be meaningful. This doesn't have to be sat doing mindfulness, but if that helps, that's a great thing to be doing. It might be sitting down with a coffee and really appreciating it, really tasting and smelling the coffee. It might be picking up a book for 5 minutes or watching something on TV that is just entertaining and distracting. Whatever that is fine, but schedule it in so that it's there. These are your battery recharge points, and they're crucial to being able to live well and having that emotional well-being balance that means you can travel whatever the map looks like with lymphoma. Really important as well is taking some time to think about actually what matters most to you. Sometimes that's the question that gets lost when you're living with lymphoma. There can be lots of questions about what's wrong with you, but less questions about what matters to you. Thinking about that actually helps to orient us on the map, helps us to decide what we want to do and what our aims are or our goals are, either for today or for a week's time or for 6 months' time, whatever that might be. But having aims that are meaningful to you, whether that's because the most important thing for you is around family or being physically active or being sociable, whatever those things are, your aims and goals need to be directed towards that, because that's what helps us to be able to work towards them, to move towards them when they're meaningful for us and important. So when you're looking at setting any sort of aim, it's really important to look at what are the small steps in achieving it, because otherwise it can feel overwhelming and unmanageable. And each of those small steps is important in itself. It's an achievement. And it's important to be realistic about those. If a step becomes unmanageable, it's because it was too many steps. It was probably 3 steps instead of 1. And actually writing this out, if that feels like a comfortable thing to do, or drawing it out, can actually help you to focus on that better and to see what you've done and what works and what doesn't work. But it's equally okay to do that in your head, or to get someone else to keep a map of that for you if that makes it more manageable to do. In doing that, it's really important to think about actually what would make it easier for me to do these things. if you're thinking about going for a walk and you're worried about meeting other people and having to start a conversation with them because you've maybe not been out much recently, or you've not met people since you've had your diagnosis, then if it would be easier to go somewhere different and quieter, think about where that might be that you would still enjoy being. Think about the time that you would go at. Would it be easier to go at 7 o'clock in the evening, just as the lights going or the day's changing, because there'll be less people around and you won't have to have that conversation? That's okay. Anything that makes it easier is taking you towards that aim that matters to you. So thinking about what would get in the way is equally important. That's not being negative. That's not negative thinking. That is actually a really positive thing to be doing, because you're thinking about what is that I need to be able to achieve this. And if something's going to get in the way of it, then it's not going to be helpful. So if you need to, the ideal location you'd like to go to is for a coffee is a bus ride away, but you really don't want to get on the bus, or the buses aren't running frequently enough for you to get there when you'd want to, then actually it's realistic, and it's important to recognise that and to say, okay, I'd like to go there, but actually the cafe closer by, it's not my first choice, but that would mean I can still go and meet my friend and I can have that coffee and check it out then. Notice, was it worthwhile, is the really important thing then. The other thing here is to remember that actually this isn't all on you. Other people can help and other people want to help. And that can be a real challenge for all of us. Our brains can often tell us that when something feels overwhelming, it's because of us. And actually it isn't. If something feels overwhelming, it's because it's overwhelming. And if that's the case, chances are we need someone else alongside us with that, someone to take some of the load. And whether that's the physical load or the mental load or the emotional load, that's okay, but it's completely understandable. So one of the most important things we can do for our well-being is to ask for and to take help. And even if it feels contrary to everything you would normally do in life, learning how to ask people for what you need or what would be useful for you can be really transformative, because other people often want to do something but don't know what to do. So you're giving them something that's manageable, something that they can actually do for you that is useful. And that is a huge relief to them and actually makes them feel better. So if one of the things that's important to you is helping other people, then in asking for help, you're already doing that. And it's something that people often talk to me about, that they've noticed that when one of the most important things to them is independence, they think that means they've got to do everything themselves. And then when they realise that actually asking for help and taking some help can mean they can be more independent because they can do more of the things that matter to them with that bit of help, that's a real point of change in life for them and helps them to feel that they are navigating life again the way they want to and being able to get to where they want to get. So although it's a challenge, being able to practice asking for help can be incredibly important. And it's one of those things where we only know it works when we've tested it out. So it requires a brave first step, but it's certainly part of being compassionate towards yourself. There's so much help around. Comes in lots of different forms for whatever you need at that particular time. So it might be that what you need and want is just someone to talk to who actually understands what it's like to be living with lymphoma, someone who you don't have to explain anything to, who knows what it's like to be a friend or a loved one or a carer of someone with lymphoma. It might be that what you need is something to help you to relax because you can't do that, and you know that your body is so tense that that's not helping you be able to get through every day. In that case, complementary therapies can be fantastic. It might be Go into your local support group or a support group online, like the wonderful ones that Lymphoma Action do, where people become really closely bonded to each other. They get each other, they know what each other's stories are, and actually that can be a real easing of the pressure to be with familiar people who understand what's going on, and you don't have to explain yourself. There's always a helpline to be able to call as well. If you're on something like active monitoring, it might be that you're not as connected in with your healthcare team as you've been at other times. So reaching out to other areas of support can be massively important in improving your toolkit and building your toolkit. But there are also more structured helps available. So right across the country, the IAPT services, improving access to psychological therapies, are there. You can self-refer to most of those, just either via a website or through a phone call, or actually the specialist cancer psychology and psycho-oncology services like the one I work in that are available to people. And usually your GP or your cancer nurse specialist can help you to access those services. So it's not about having to have one type of help. It's knowing that there's a whole range of help out there and that you can choose what is right for you and for your emotional well-being toolkit, and that what's right for you is different to someone else. And that might mean having a constellation of these things. You might find that actually having some complementary therapy that's available through a local service or even at your local hospital might be useful, alongside being part of one of the lymphoma support groups or occasional calls to the line. Just noticing what's right for you, and it's okay to try it out and then decide if something's the right fit or not the right fit for you. And that's particularly important when we're thinking about accessing more formal supports like those through IAPT or through cancer psychology services. If it doesn't feel like the right thing for you, that's okay. You can say no and no thank you, I've given it a try, but that's not right for me. And you can come back later if that's then the right time for you. There's always flexibility in this. So again, for your toolkit, it's worth then having a think about, so what is it that actually helps to make things feel differently for me? What can I do, and who do I know or who's in my life that reduces my stress or anxiety? What is it that improves my mood, makes me feel more able to do the stuff that's most important to me? And what do I notice about it when I do these things? Having a bit of a check-in and saying, so did I feel better when I did that? Or did I feel the same? Is it worth doing it again? We're just testing things out to see what makes it into the toolkit and what doesn't make it into the toolkit, because you're definitely the expert in you. And again, it's really important to remember that this isn't about having to change everything. This is about changing one thing, because actually if you can make your stress 10% less or improve your mood by 10%, that's a big difference overall. We don't have to change everything at once. It's little tweaks to make a difference at first. And then I guess when we've tried those things, it's deciding what makes it into the toolkit. So going back to those questions we've asked ourselves throughout this, just thinking about what is it actually that matters to me most, because that's going to tell me where to focus. What are the things that trigger me? What are the things in life that can make me feel a bit lower or make me feel more anxious or stressed? And then what are the things that I can do about that? What's my pause and reset button? Is it a bit of mindfulness? Is it being able to sit down with a coffee? Is it having an elastic band on my wrist that I can snap and that just reminds me that there's something else going on other than what's going on in my head? What are the things that help me? And who are the people who help me? And asking yourself the question about, do I need some extra help just now? And we're going to put a sheet with the resources where we can put the answers to that, just so you've got an emergency planning sheet. Because actually, when our brain hijacks us, when we're in that fight or flight, freeze or flop place, as we've already said, we can't do the thinking part. So just having a single page there, whether it's on your laptop or on your phone or a piece of paper in a file that says, this is the first step. These are the things that are useful. Just reduces the cognitive load on us and makes it easier to do the reset. So thank you very much for bearing with me and my limited technical skills. And I'm really glad people have been able to log on and to think about what their wellbeing toolkit might be like. So all of the resources that I've mentioned throughout this are going to be available so that you can just try some of them out, just have a play around with them, see what's right for you, what isn't right for you, what makes it into the toolkit and what doesn't, and put in there the things that were already working for you and that still work for you that have maybe gone out of your mind. So thank you very much. Bye now.